Hello, so today we're going to talk about TXs and RXs, and we're going to talk briefly about this and about this and about this. And basically what I'm going to do is just quickly talk you through the pros and cons of these TXs, how to update and flash the ELRS modules inside of them, because these are both the TXs with the internal ELRS. So I'm going to update both of these, show you how to do that. I'm going to update and bind the little receiver and talk you through the pros and cons of these particular radios, which one is the best, if you will, and how it compares to trusty old Crossfire. So let's get cracking. So here we have the Jumper T Pro, which uses the standard 18650 lithium ion batteries that we're all familiar with, has built-in internal ELRS module rated up to 1 watt. And ideally this would be the only radio that you ever need. Perfectly sized, perfectly comfortable to use. Sadly made for about 4.5 pence in China, and sadly that shows. Everything about this radio is cheap. The fit and finish is all sort of rough and scuffy. The gimbals, while they feel lovely and nice, will be too loose for many people, and you can't tighten them, you can only make them looser. And unforgivably, on this particular radio, yaw does not like to center, and it will sometimes drift by about 20 points. So you'll center it and it will be at 1480. You'll center it again, it will be at 1504, and no amount of configuring the sticks will change that. Other positions all have a bit of jitter out of the box, regardless of what power you're using, by about 4 to 5 points, and that isn't particularly a big deal. The yaw is a bigger deal, but of course when you're flying you'll tend to be sort of constantly moving, so it doesn't really sort of cause an issue too much, but it's there and it's really annoying and it should be fixable. Concerns about this particular radio: it runs EdgeTX, as I said, it runs ELRS, and it will go up to 1 watt. However, if you're running an external ELRS module at 1 watt, you will generally have a fan attached to it because it will get super hot, and this little guy does not. What it has is a sort of a radiator, a heatsink inside, and I'm imagining, although I can't test it because it's freezing in the UK at the moment, that if you are running this for prolonged periods on a hot sunny day, this thing is going to get damn hot and the performance will suffer. There are also lots of issues that people are talking about online, namely if you crank the power output up to 1 watt, because there isn't much shielding inside the radio, it causes additional jitter on the sticks. My one doesn't do this, but as I said, the jitter is there regardless of what power I run ELRS on. If you're using this particular radio, forget about the 1 watt in my opinion, and run it at a max of 250 or possibly 500, which should give you more than enough range that you'll ever need, unless you're really pushing the extremes of long range, which generally speaking with quadcopters we do not. I tend to run at 100 milliwatts, and that is absolutely fine for the type of flying that I do. So this is a flawed product. The great thing about it is it feels lovely in your hand. It could be such a great thing, but sadly it's been let down. These momentary switches have been much talked about. As I said before, not a big issue, just use these ones. Job done. You know, arm, and then your mode switches. So that is that out of the way. For its price, it comes with an SD card. Obviously you have to buy the batteries, but it does not come with the sort of SMA extender to put an additional or change the antenna to a better one. So you're stuck out of the box with this one, which inside is basically just a little flat antenna. How good this antenna is, I couldn't tell you. It's been perfectly fine in the flying that I've done, but I'm flying well within the capabilities which most of us will be doing of such a potential long-range system. And I say long-range because even though these use 2.4 gigahertz, whereas Crossfire uses 900 or 868 in Europe, and you tend to find that the lower hertz you use, the more penetration you have. People have been getting sort of 30 kilometers plus at 100 milliwatts, so it's not really a particular issue. The Radiomaster Zorro is a completely different animal.
Welcome to HTX.
And this has its own bugbears, of which this is immediately one of them. This isn't really a sort of game style controller, although it looks like it. It's really big, really heavy and really chunky compared to the much lighter and smaller T Pro. However, the major difference that you'll find straight out of the box is this whiffs of quality. Everything about it just feels nice. Everything is nicely finished. The plastics are all lovely and smooth. The bit at the back is this sort of rubberized plastic which feels nice. It feels like someone's actually taken time and attention while designing it. The gimbals are lovely and they can be just adjusted for both to make them both tighter and looser regardless of what you do. And it has a ton of switches, sliders, buttons and everything you can possibly think of. It also has this, which you'll notice is a balance connector, and that's because somewhat oddly, while the majority of controllers such as this will use 18650 batteries, which you can get at 3000 milliamp hour, this uses silly little short batteries. If I just turn it off, you will see it uses these silly little dumpy batteries which you have to buy, which are 18350, and you won't find any of those by quality manufacturers because they're not common and most people don't use them, and you won't find them above 900 milliamp hours or thereabouts, which means that this radio, if you turn it on and fly, is going to last you an hour and a half before those batteries need recharging. The good news is it will recharge really, really quickly in about 30 minutes or so from a power bank or something like that. But they clearly knew about this, which is why they put this balance connector, and the idea is you basically can strap another LiPo to here and substitute and run additional power, and it comes with a little battery strap to do that. It's got some odd quirks. You charge it at the bottom like so, but if you want to plug it in and use it on your PC, etc., you'll have to use the top one, and it has a little plug here so you can use and install a separate antenna if you wish to do so. And again, it comes with an SD card. Now, this is a really well built radio, and as I said, it shows. The issue with it for someone or people like ourselves who are using quadcopters and we don't need all this fancy issue is one of ergonomics. When I'm holding it in my hand, my fingers naturally want to rest on these sliders, and it's really annoying. Even though I'm not using them, I'm constantly feeling them moving under my fingers. And you can't put them below because you've got these two switches here. The other addition is that on most radios you will flick forward to arm and back to disarm. On this particular guy, all of your controls are reversed, so you press down when the radio is on, and then if you want to arm, etc., you pull towards you. So basically, if you want it to work like a normal radio where you would go such, you have to reverse all your channels. Not the end of the world, but it's just not particularly, or should I say, it's not as comfortable to hold as the Tango 2 or the Jumper T Pro. And both of these radios, and this is the Tango 2, just fit nicely in your hands, and everything is where you want it to be. You'll notice that all of mine have got rid of the silly little narrow stick ends because I'm a thumber, so this is using Free Sky, I think they're umbrella antenna ends, and on both this and the T Pro I printed off some 3D printed stick ends just to make it more comfortable to hold. So this guy also will only go up to 250 milliwatts of power, but as I said, I don't really see that as a bugbear because it's plenty for the majority of people who want to fly even at relatively long range. And as I said, this one will do 1 watt, which is, you know, 4 times the pallet power, but in reality, with gains reducing the higher you go up, and the potential issues of this thing overheating, etc., I think Radiomaster probably hit the sweet spot with 250, and it means you're not going to have overheating issues, etc. Both of them have module bays which you can attach, obviously, additional controllers to. The Zorro in its ELRS mode basically comes from the factory nicely set up. However, one thing you will notice is if you go into the usual, excuse me as he hits the back, if you go into here where you would have your Lua scripts, you'll notice that out of the box it comes with about 10 other ones for Free Sky and Fly Sky and all sorts of stuff, and that's because obviously its twin brother has a multi-protocol receiver and transmitter inside, whereas this one doesn't, so just delete those. But everything about this feels a much higher quality than this. This, however, is the radio that my son, who is learning to fly, keeps picking up, simply because it's much more comfortable to hold. In terms of quality, the Tango 2 kind of sits in the middle of these guys, because while it feels cheap and nasty and the plastics don't feel nice and the screen's too small so you have to squint at it, in reality, after bashing it around and shoving it in my bag for the last, I don't know, a year or 2 years, however long it was before they came out, it stood the test of time. And the things that I didn't like about it, namely these switches, which cause sort of like a momentary sort of fraction of a second pause before you disarm, in that case, rather than ones like this, I've actually grown to really like. In terms of setup, people go on about how easy Crossfire and the TBS stuff is to set up, and it is really easy. You turn it on, it automatically binds to your receiver, blah blah blah. What I've found is if you have a problem with Crossfire, it's a pain in the arse to fix, because TBS don't really have any documentation, so you've got to spend 3 hours mooching around on the internet to try and find what's wrong. And I've actually found ELRS a much friendlier ecosystem, and their website covers pretty much everything you could possibly come across. So that's it for the overview. If I was buying any of these radios today and I didn't have all of these and the T16S and all the rest of it, which one would I buy? Well, it's not this one as much as I love the way it holds in my hand and, you know, the cheap receivers and all the rest of it, because it's clearly cheap and nasty. It's not this one, because although it works really well, I don't need the penetration that in the UK 868 gives me, and it's, you know, almost twice as expensive as the ELRS radios. The one I'd actually buy with my own money if I didn't have a radio today is this one, because while ergonomically it's not as comfortable to hold as the other two, and although these sliders bug me, I'm just going to basically glue them fixed or remove them. It's comfortable enough in my hands, it feels quality, and with ELRS you can buy a receiver for 10 quid, and even these days now Crossfire has got a lot cheaper, you're still looking at double that price. And I don't think Crossfire offers anything that the majority of pilots really need unless you're doing extreme long range. The other thing about ELRS is potentially it has less latency than Crossfire. Crossfire will basically use 150 Hertz and then drop to 50 Hertz when it needs to, unless you fix it when you're doing long range. All of the ELRS radios will basically go from 50 to 500 Hertz, and the long and the short of that is as you climb up and you get to 500 you get less latency, but you by proxy you get shorter range. Even running 500, I've had no issues with fail safes or anything like that using the standard receivers with little T antennas, but I can't honestly feel the difference between 250 and 500, so I tend to run mine basically just on 250 Hertz, as it gives me what I need without any of the fuff. And if you go into the little lure here, you can see there's my packet rate, 250, and you can adjust the power like so. Basically I'm on 100 right now, and you can go to 250 milliwatt, and if I go back, he says not being able to do it. You can change your packet rate to 500 or 250, etc, etc. So there we go. So I'm just going to show you how to set these guys up really briefly, and then we'll come to the end of this video. So the first thing we're going to do after you've downloaded the ELRS configurator is basically we're just going to go into it, and this is the page that you will come across first of all. In here we'll select, in this case 2.2, which is the latest version, and in target you will just select the device that you are going to flash. So if we were going to do the Radiomaster, we would just scroll down to Radiomaster 2.4 gig, and the device we're going to flash is a Radiomaster Zorro. If we're going to flash the jumper, we will just do the same again, jumper 2.4 gig, and we will go to jumper Aeon Mini 2400 TX, which is that one. So all I'm going to do is go back to the Radiomaster, as the process for both is exactly the same. We'll set the Radiomaster, and we're going to flash via Wi-Fi, which is my preferred option. Here you will choose your domain, and we will choose this one because we don't want to be restricted to 10 milliwatt. This is your custom binding phrase. You'll see that mine is just my first name and part of my surname. It's not a secret, anybody can see it. It doesn't really matter what it is as long as it's your own personal one, because what that will basically do is mean that your receivers automatically bind regardless of what radio you pick up, and you won't have to bind the receiver manually. The rest of this will just keep on its standard. And then what we want to do is we will click build, not build and flash. So click build. And it will go through this jazz for quite some time. It can take sort of 5 or 10 minutes when you first do it. But what this is basically doing is building the firmware update for this particular module. Once it's done its thing, it will come up with this little folder with two firmwares in it. They're both exactly the same, so for peace of mind, just click on the one that you want. I like to use the one that has the name so I can see what it is. Copy it, and then create yourself a little folder, in this case ELRS, and paste it into said folder. And that is where the firmware is going to live for now. And that is, for the configurator, the bit we've done. What we need to do now is go into our radio, turn it on.
Welcome to HTX.
And this is both the same for both the jumper and the Radiomaster. Go into where your Lua scripts are, go into Express ELRS, and what we need to do is turn on Wi-Fi. And it's the same for both radios because they're both using HTX. We've turned on Wi-Fi. What we will do then is we will go to our Wi-Fi port, or Wi-Fi on our computer, and what we're looking for is basically HTX or Express LRS to show up, which you can see it has done there. We're going to connect to that. And it's now connected. We're going to open a web page. And the web page we want is this one, 10.0.0.0.1. We're going to scroll down to where it says firmware update. We're going to choose the file and we're going to go to the location that we saved it. And there is our file. We're going to click open, and then we're going to click update. And you can see it's now flashing the radio. And there you go, your radio is now updated. So what you want to do is give it a little bit of a second. And then the next thing we will do is we will go back into here and we will download the Lua script. And again, you can save that Lua script into here, like so. And you can see our Lua script is there, and make sure it ends in .lua. You can then take your radio. With the radio turned on, plug in the USB-C cable to the top and go into USB storage, and you will see that our Zorro has appeared as one of our drives. You want to go into the USB drive within it, and you basically want to go down to scripts, tools, and you want to copy and paste the ELRS v2 Lua into here. At this point you can remove all the other gubbins about FreeSky and FlySky and all the rest of it, because we don't need those. This is a radio that's just going to be using ELRS. You can leave Crossfire there because it's handy to have if you want to change your PIDs, etc. And the ELRS one seems a little bit buggy. But that is that. When it comes to receivers, the one I've been using is the EP1 and also the EP2, which is the same as this one but has a little ceramic antenna, so you don't need the additional T antenna on it. And I like these little guys because they have built-in Wi-Fi, so you can do Wi-Fi flashing. The process is pretty much the same as it is to update the TX, and again this applies to both the jumper and the Radiomaster. The one thing I would say is there is a quirk within ELRS. So what you'll find on some flight controllers, particularly the AIO ones, is if you connect it to a UART and attempt to flash it or bind it, it will give you a solid light, which basically means it's in boot mode. and there are some UARTs within certain flight controllers that ELRS just doesn't like for some reason. So if that's the case, just change your UARTs. And what I'd recommend you do is when you're flashing it, is just not to connect the TX and RX wires. So like this, all I've done is just connected the power wires. And the process is essentially the same. So we're basically just going to choose happy model because it's a happy model receiver. We're going to choose EP because it's an EP receiver, and we're going to choose RX 2400 because that's what it is. And we're going to choose Wi-Fi flashing again. Again, we're going to leave all this the same. We're going to use the same binding phrase because that basically means that the receiver will automatically bind to the TX. And then we're just going to build. And it will go through the same old jazz again. And when it comes to the end of it, it will open up that little file, which again, you will copy to the folder on your desktop. And we'll just go through the same process as we did before. We will then give our little receiver some power. And after about 20 seconds, this guy will start flashing really, really rapidly. And at that point in time, we should be able to use its internal Wi-Fi to connect as we did when we were flashing the TX. Once you get used to this system, it's dead easy and not really any harder than the Crossfire setup. So if we go into our Wi-Fi, we will see Express, ELRS, RX appear, and we'll connect to that and do the same again. If I turn the Radiomaster on, because it's using the same bind phrase,
Welcome to HTX.
that it's bound to that radio as well. Again, because the binding phrase is the same. As long as the binding phrase in the internal module is the same, it will automatically bind to your receiver, which is super handy. Right, so the internal module of our radio is updated, our receiver is updated and bound. We don't need to worry about updating EdgeTX. I would just sit on the firmware that you've got, unless there are later bugs, but give it a few months for it to settle down before you start updating that. In terms of basic setup, the first thing we want to do is turn off ADC filter. So in this case, using the Radiomaster, you'll go into the system, go to where you have your Lua scripts, you'll page across to hardware, scroll up, and you want to make sure that ADC filter is switched off. In terms of your model setup, Radiomaster have made it pretty simple. Jumper from memory is a little bit more complicated, but what you want to do is just create some models. Now I tend to have a model for each of the different firmwares that I fly with. So I've got Ultra for KISS Ultra, KISS Standard and Betaflight, and they're all pretty much the same. So if we go into them and just page across, you'll see that I've basically just named them. And to set it up, I'm not going to go into this single, but it basically just needs to look like so. So you have 4 inputs: rudder, elevator, throttle and aileron, and you will basically set them up like so. And in your mixes pages, you basically just set up 8 channels like so, or the 8 channels that you are using. and I can't be bothered going through the ins and outs of this, but I'll just link to you to a video where it shows that. There are a couple of things that you can do in Betaflight presets if you're using 4.3 for ELRS, and if you're using Betaflight 4.2, I'll put a link in the description to Oscar Liang, I think his surname is, who has a really good write-up about ELRS and some commands that you can put in the console to basically smooth your inputs, etc. on Betaflight. KISS doesn't need any of those, it does them by proxy. And that is the long and the short of it. EdgeTX seems absolutely fine. It's essentially on this without the fancy touchscreens, etc. It's pretty much identical to OpenTX. It just of course fits more radios. But if I was buying,
battery low.
I better turn that off. If I was buying a radio, as I said right now, I wouldn't be spending 160 quid on a Tango 2. I'd be spending 80 or 90 quid on the Radiomaster, buying myself some cheap receivers and going out and having some fun. In terms of how you want to set up,
Welcome to HTX.
and I'll use this guy because the battery's going down. I'm trying to remember what commands. If you go into Express ELRS, you notice there's a couple of different things that you can choose. Packet rate, again, you can go all the way down to 50 and all the way up to 500. Again, the higher your packet rate, the lower latency you will have. For me, 500 versus 250, I can't really tell the difference. I'm a freestyle pilot, I'm not racing. If you can, by all means, use 500. Just know that you will have less range if you do that. If you're flying particular long range, then you will have that packet rate as low as it can be. The other things on here, telemetry, ratio, etc., you don't really need to play around with. Essentially all that is the number of times the data is sent backwards and forwards, and you can read up on that if you wish to do so. Switch mode we'll ignore, and then we've just got TX power. I tend to fly at 100 milliwatts, which is plenty, but of course depending on which radio you've got, you can crank it all the way up to 1000 if you wish to do so. But to me, that just seems overkill for the flying that we tend to do, even if it's in trees, etc. 100 is absolutely fine. And on this particular radio, I'd be very careful about going up to 1000, even if you wish to do so, just because of component failure and potential glitches and issues. I would probably go up to 500 as a max, although 250 should be fine for most people. So yeah, that's it really. Really chuffed with my initial thoughts on ELRS. It seems to have really matured into a nice system. It's pretty intuitive once you've got your head around how it works. It's easy to use. The TXs are dirt cheap and super tiny compared to their Crossfire colleagues. And of course, because you're using 2.4 rather than 900, you have much smaller antennas, which is always nice. Because the Immortal T is not very immortal on the Crossfire. So yeah, if you've got a TBS Tango 2 and you're happy with it, there's no real reason to rush out and update. In my opinion, the Tango 2 does its job. It does it well. It's super comfy. My one, as I said, has been through hell and back, and it's still working and fine. And although it feels cheap and nasty, it is a quality product. But why would you spend 160 quid on a Tango when you can get a Radiomaster for not much more than half the price, and you get obviously the benefits of a more flexible system, much easier binding between radios, and of course tiny little receivers. So yeah, this one was bought by me This one was sent to me via your FPV, so thanks for that. He just wanted my opinions on it. So yeah, Radiomaster for me. Jumper, you made a great design and then cocked it up by making it super cheap and nasty. TBS, you need to pull your finger out and either add some better features or make it cheaper. And Radiomaster, you win. Cheers guys, thanks, bye bye.